Hi, my name is Garrison Frost. I'm with Audubon, California. I'm here with Bill Monahan, Senior GIS Scientist for Audubon, California. And we're here to discuss today's release of new information regarding climate change and bird ranges among California birds. Bill, I was wondering if you could sort of explain some of your research in quick terms, and we'll get into some more questions.
Sure, okay. So what we did was take information on known bird distributions and couple it with information on climate, and use that information to formulate a series of spatial models that could then be projected to the future, so we could map how bird species will likely move in response to future climate change out to the end of the 21st century.
So Bill, what did we find in terms of results regarding California birds?
Kind of in a nutshell, what we found was that about a third of the bird species in our study, and we were looking at about 300 bird species, were predicted to experience pretty significant losses in range out to the end of the 21st century.
Interesting. Now, when you say predicted loss of range, what do you mean? How does range relate to bird population and habitat?
The connections between range and population, say bird population size, are a little tough to sort out in this context. So we really are talking about the distribution of the species in California as opposed to, say, its population size per se. So in other words, where it's found in California versus, say, where it's not found. In relation to habitat, at these larger spatial scales, say looking at all of California, climate does relate pretty well to habitat. So kind of in a crude sense, these distribution models that we've developed are kind of capturing a lot of what we would know about the bird habitats at the large spatial scales.
Interesting. Now, I understand it's not all bad news, though, in this study. There's actually room for hope from your research. So what, can you explain some of that to me?
That's right. There is room for hope. So our work considered three different major emission scenarios. So climate change is caused by increasing greenhouse gases in our atmosphere, and our work considered a low emission scenario, a mid emission scenario, and then a high emission scenario. And one of the encouraging aspects of our research was that many bird species were projected to lose a relatively small amount of their range looking to the future on the low emission scenario versus a much higher loss of range under the high emission scenario. So kind of suggesting that there's this opportunity, if we can curb our greenhouse gas emissions, to kind of help conserve birds looking to the future.
Can you give me a couple examples of birds in these different scenarios and what you mean?
Sure. So the California gnatcatcher is a common bird species down in coastal areas of Southern California, and that's a species where under the low emission scenario could lose about 6 or 7% of its current range, but under the high emission scenario it could lose upwards of 56% of its range. So a very wide range there depending on how good of a job we do at curbing greenhouse gas emissions. And another good example would be the yellow-billed magpie, which is a bird species that's found only in California, and it's found in the Central Valley and some of the coastal, central coast ranges of California. And that's a species that could lose about 9% of its range, current range, under the low emission scenario, or upwards of 75% of its current range lost under the high emission scenario.
That's interesting. So what are some of the ways in which Audubon, California, and even other folks can use this data to help protect some of these birds?
So I think we need to be prepared for some loss as a result of climate change, particularly focusing on birds in California. But by the same time, I think there is this opportunity to really influence the magnitude of that loss and to shape how much loss we will actually experience. And climate change really is a global problem, so ultimately these solutions need to be implemented around the world, but California can be a leader in implementing a lot of these solutions. Things as kind of simple or straightforward as reducing our dependence on oil and promoting clean alternative energies, to other systems like establishing a cap and trade program where we can actually really get our greenhouse gas emissions under control. And in California, we have some specific mechanisms in place that would allow us to achieve a lot of this. For instance, State Assembly Bill 32 or the California Global Warming Solutions Act would be a nice framework for trying to push a lot of these climate mitigation policies.
Now, one thing that's interesting about this research is it seems to give us some information about how we might help the birds that are struggling through climate change do better over the next several decades, more on the adaptation side of things rather than mitigation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you can describe maybe how this research might be used by some of those folks to make better conservation investments and decisions.
That's right. So in addition to the need for climate change mitigation, we also need to be thinking longer term about climate change adaptation. So this idea that even under our best efforts at curbing greenhouse gas emissions, there still will be some changes in climate looking to the future. And so we have to think about taking steps to help species adapt to that change. So in other words, persist in the areas where they're found now, or in some cases move into the areas where they're going to be favored to colonize. So the type of research that we've done kind of at one level helps us prioritize these landscapes for conservation, so we can have a much clearer understanding of areas where we simply don't expect the bird species to be able to continue to survive in the future, and therefore figure out those areas where it might be able to persist in the future or maybe expand into in the future, so that we can better prioritize those landscapes for conservation.
Terrific. Well, Bill, thanks a lot. I would encourage anybody who wants to learn more about this to go to our website at www.ca.audubon.org and read the report yourself. Thanks.